Good morning. Thanks everyone for joining, and welcome to all of those who are kind of joining us on the call here. Really excited for the session that we got planned for you all today. Both content that we're really excited about, as well as a couple speakers that we're really excited about too. My name is Peter McKee. I'm the founder of a compensation tech software company called Equium. I'm hosting the session today. Really excited again about both the content and the topic area here. We're getting into how to make sure that your compensation programs stay adaptive, react to changes, navigate changes. And we've got a couple of really experienced professionals here we think have a lot of experience to draw on there and kind of share what they've learned about those topics. So joining us, we've got both Andrew Cole, who is a compensation advisor at Pacific Compensation Advisors, bringing his experience from companies like Meta, Airbnb, Impossible Foods. And we also have Nishita Sethna, who is the VP of Total Rewards at Braze. Also a lot of experience coming from both most recently Drizzly and then the financial industry before that. They're here again to just share a number of real life examples on kind of how to handle strategies for keeping your compensation program adaptive. We will go through a number of questions that we have planned on the topic area, and then we'll make sure to save a little bit of time at the end to go over any additional questions that might come in through the audience if you all want to put them in the chat. So let's get right into it. The first question I had for both of you, and again, thanks, to both of you for joining us this morning, is really just, what are the key metrics, data points, things that you both in your experiences have kept an eye on and monitored to assess whether or not your approach to compensation, your company's strategy is effective? And what are the things that you're really tracking when you're running a compensation program? Nishita.
Yeah, perfect. As Peter mentioned, I'm working at Braze as VP of Total Rewards, so I'm going to kind of answer this from an internal view. I'm curious if AJ has some metrics that from a consultative side that he would track. But for me, and before I answer the question, I think I'll caveat here that the selection of the specific comp metrics will be very dependent on and should tie back to the company's overall comp philosophy, the financial and business objectives of the organization, as well as the overall HR strategy. That said, the metrics I've consistently used in my career, and I believe are pretty much always relevant, regardless of the type of organization you're aligned to, is things like offer acceptance rates and offer decline reasons. So really understanding, how competitive are you in the market, and if your decline rate is high, then what is the underlying reason for that? Does it tie back to comp or is it other factors? Similarly, employee turnover rates and data from exit survey interviews is always something I look at. Employee satisfaction rates measured through engagement surveys, that's always something the comp team has a pulse on. Retention rates, particularly those of high performers, you want to get a sense of, once you actually close on a hire and you bring them in, how long are they around? Do you have tenure? Can you link that back to your comp programs? Sort of a more high level stat that I always like to have in my back pocket is compensation costs, as well as revenue ratios. So essentially measuring the total cost of your comp in relation to the company's sales or OpEx. It just helps to sort of evaluate the cost effectiveness, because there's, as comp professionals, everyone attending this call will know we sort of wear two hats. There's how do we ensure we have competitive compensation programs to attract the caliber of talent that we want, but at the same time, is that affordable? And how does that track relative to our internal goals? A couple of other metrics I also, tend to look at include things like red and green circled rates. So again, that just helps me understand what are my outliers relative to the comp bands that we've created. And so, of course, if you have established salary structures, I would recommend looking at that as well. Pay compression rates, that's also a good way for me to tell if, the comp program is really taking into consideration where people sit relative to either new hires coming into the same role. Are they coming in higher than our incumbent population, or do managers, does their pay start to lag new hires or those that report to them? And then lastly, one important metric that I don't know that it always gets tied back to the effectiveness of the comp program or strategy is really frequent pay equity reviews. And what I mean by that is, of course, I would encourage all organizations to sort of embark on that annual big pay equity study that you conduct with statisticians and economists. But what I found most helpful is to build that into your day-to-day comp management programs and really say, okay, at time of hire or before comp cycle or just during the year, how does our how does compensation compare for the various demographic groups that we have in the organization? And I think that's a really key indicator to include in there as well.
What
Yeah,
a
go ahead, AJ.
thorough answer. Sorry, Peter, I'll jump in. So that was a very thorough answer. So I have really the same kind of notes, and I always like to begin with this has got to be custom to the comp strategy of the company. So good point there. Our comp philosophy guides everything here. That's, having our metrics in place at the start allows us to have something to benchmark against to check our progress. Um, Similar things. I always check time to hire. So if that's starting to uptick, that might indicate that we're starting to lag the market. Focusing on our critical roles, everything here. If software engineering talent is critical to us, or say, food scientist talent at another company, those are the roles I'll dive into. Are those taking longer to hire? Are we having to make more exceptions to our pay programs and our pay bands, similar to red circling? Look at turnover, attrition. It's a little bit of a lagging indicator, but if it's ticking up, then we probably do have a problem. It's not always comp related, but if it's across the board, then it very well might be. And I also like to ask about counteroffers. If organizations are having to leverage a lot of counteroffers, that might indicate a culture issue, but it might very well just indicate a comp issue, especially if those are what's successful and people are actually sticking around afterwards. Not that I recommend counteroffers. In fact, I'm usually like, oh, what's going on with our system that we're having to leverage those? Internal to the comp strategy, just focusing on comp alone, hiring exceptions anytime we go out of band. I always like to build in an exception process. This is very similar just to having good practices around pay equity, making sure that every offer that goes out is calibrated and actually fits into our ranges. Or if we're having to make an exception, why? Were our expectations off? Did we get an incredibly talented candidate, somebody special here? Or again, are we just finding that negotiation wise, we're lagging and we need to maybe look to our ranges, do another competitive assessment, bring in refresh market data and do another evaluation? So that goes into market positioning, comp ratio, typical spreads there, always critical relating to our comp strategies, our fundamental metrics, comp ratio. And in addition to pay equity, I always like to check like incumbent spreads and even, in a comp planning session, manager inversions. So when a recommendation might actually put the employee's pay above their manager, that might be fine. In a lot of cases, that is fine, but it definitely needs to be something we're aware of in advance.
Yeah, really thorough kind of coverage from both of you there. I love the touching on both competitiveness and cost effectiveness of the program, but then also the fairness, because those are both obviously reasons where you want to kind of re-examine your compensation strategy, especially looking at all of those metrics and all of the different ways that you can kind of track the effectiveness of your compensation strategy. Would love to kind of take it into an example. Wondering if you can both maybe share an instance from your career or whatever level of specificity makes sense for you, where something that you saw in a shift in the industry, either through one of the metrics that you mentioned in your response to the previous question, or through something else that you noticed, indicated to you that you need to rethink part or much of your compensation strategy, and maybe just share a little bit about what that was and how you knew you needed to make a change there.
Yeah, I can start with that. So, I mean, I think everyone listening into this call will have examples or times in their career where, the engineering population or the legal population started to lag benchmarks, and we needed to go back and reevaluate those. So I think that's pretty much part of the role, comes with the territory. But the one example when I saw this question that comes to mind is really, I think, again, something I'm pretty sure every single person here has dealt with was obviously when the pandemic hit, we had to now all of a sudden start looking at remote work and how that translates to pay. And that was a very, very real concern for the organization I was working with at the time, really taking a look at not just compensation in a remote setting, but geographic pay differentials. The sign internally that prompted us to say, okay, we need to reevaluate this was when we started receiving a very large influx of requests from employees to relocate, often permanently. And that sort of gave the comp team and senior management some pause and made us think about strategy for fully remote workers, and specifically how do we address compensation for those who were permanently relocating to geographies that had very different higher or lower costs of labor rates. And so that was really something we had to very thoughtfully approach. It is compensation just as the nature of what it is, it's a very personal topic, and you need to be very deliberate when you're making any widespread changes or rolling out any new big sweeping program enhancements or just tweaks even. So that was really something that we really gathered a lot of data to say, okay, is this, first of all, is this a big enough issue that we actually need to address it? How does this tie back to the overall strategic objectives of the company? Are we going to move towards, we are remote first, or are we writing this out and then we're going to kind of go back to business as usual, in office location, not maybe a hybrid schedule? Like, there were so many unknowns at that point. And so it really eventually came down to, how do we as an organization want to approach this, because we didn't have enough data to draw from the industry. All other companies were kind of figuring it out at the same time. And so this was where we really had to come in and say, okay, this is how we think about it as an organization, and here's why. So that was kind of one of the more recent changes that I did.
Yeah, I would echo the challenges with geographic differentials and pay localization during COVID and the remote work era definitely caused us to have to spin and adopt a similar sort of set of conversations. Trying to decide what our approach would be, and when we did personal, when it was a personal move or a business related move. But what I'd like to talk about here is, the problem of it being a really successful startup. Like, when does your compensation philosophy start to lag behind? When do we notice that? For instance, at Impossible Foods, when I joined, we hadn't really had a conversation yet about what was an appropriate peer group. So we did the right things. We reached out to Radford. We brought in consultants. We talked about the companies we were attracting talent from and our scale, and we created an approach that was very much fit for a startup, but didn't was pretty broad. And very, then we launched a commercially successful product, and all of a sudden had revenue, and the talent that we were trying to hire, was coming from much larger organizations, was much more experienced. So that's where the metrics, traditional compensation related metrics, but working directly and closely with our TA team, really started to highlight, some of the issues, time to hire sort of creeping up, the types of organizations we were attracting from. So what we started with here was a reevaluation of our peer group. Are we even benchmarking against the right group of companies, so that anything else that's coming into this will make any sense? So we went back there and immediately identified that the companies we hired talent from were no longer represented in the peer group that we had used to design our comp philosophy only a year prior. So that was a little bit hard. We had to start the whole process over, but now with data and with a proven approach here, and with it's more helpful to have a successful product, and when you're actually trying to sell an equity-heavy compensation program. We probably could have revisited some of the pay mixes and some of our positioning as well. But in that sense there, what we were really trying to do is just make sure that we were still being consistent now, with more capabilities to hire and attract talent and retain talent from much larger organizations. Also meant that we had to up-level all of our benefits programs and everything else related to that. Because when you're hiring talent that's more experienced, they come with more expectations from the companies that they were at. So it was a big exercise. I wouldn't say that any specific indicator, it was pretty much across the board. We're starting to see, well, time to hire is creeping up, and we're having challenges closing specifically food scientists that we need to scale the organization. And, our comp ratio says we're actually pretty aggressive, and we're making exceptions in our bands all the time. Why? And we started with some questions about, well, are we being consistent in leveling? Do we have the right expectations when we go out there and we actually benchmark the role and open a rec? And we got pretty consistent there across the organization. And we did the internal exercises to make sure we had our own internal leveling structure. After doing that work, it was still clear that we still had comp problems, and still that the data wasn't really representative of what our candidates were coming back with us, asking for. And so we did have to make some adjustments. And then, of course, you have to look back at your own organization and see where you've now changed your strategy. Well, are there people now behind, what you would have essentially said, this is the range for the role, making market adjustments there, and having to have those hard conversations about, do we rip the Band-Aid off, or are we comfortable with some, inequities while we transition?
Yeah, both great examples. And I especially having worked at a few startups myself, I'm sure that last example there from AJ is relatable to a lot of fast growing companies. All of a sudden finding yourself in a different talent segment, and maybe you weren't expecting it at first. I guess from either of the examples that both of you shared, or really any of the other examples. Kind of the next question that we wanted to talk through a little bit was just, once you've identified that there's a need for a change here, how do you assess how big of a change you need to make and what direction you need to go in? And obviously understand that that is going to be a lot dependent on what was the signal that you saw, what was the direction you're going in. But if you could both maybe just share how you think through that, or what are the frameworks, or even some examples that you might have there, that would be great.
Yeah, this is a really good question. When I think, again, to a certain extent, the answer is it is highly dependent on the problem you're trying to solve. But usually for me, my first step in assessing the scope and the direction of the necessary changes is to, of course, just conduct an evaluation of kind of our current state, map out what the desired state is going to be. And to get to that, that's where you want to engage with key stakeholders. So it could be heads of functions, legal, finance, establish really some level of internal working committee, if you will. So you have that partnership with other stakeholders outside of the comp team throughout the project. I think here's where, I really do feel that if budgets allow for it, I would certainly recommend engaging with external consultants such as Alpine. It's something we're doing right now. I think it brings a lot of value to the table because these consultants like Alpine not only bring significant expertise, but they're, I think, one of the really important, often overlooked aspect of hiring someone externally to come in and give you a sort of consultative view of your programs is really to help provide that objective view where it's not biased, it's not coming internally. I think, I certainly know that being a comp professional, that's always been something I'm very, thoughtful about, to not bring in any biases into any processes and view it rather dispassionately, if you will. But I have seen that by bringing in external counsel, getting that expertise, so you can have more clear sense of what are peer benchmarks, who are the peers we're looking at, does this really compare to the market we want to compete in? I think that external view really enables quicker buy-in. So that's sort of my first step, I'd say, when I'm assessing the scope and direction of necessary changes, is really, understand the problem, articulate it, understand what that end state, your goal, needs to be, and then get the right stakeholders in the room from the outset.
I have almost the same answer. The first step is always to have it codified. Actually write down your strategy, have a comp philosophy in place. There's a lot of early stage startups, that might be something that they haven't thought through yet, but having actually put down what we actually want our position to be, what our employee value proposition is, how do we want to position ourselves against our peers, what that marketplace is, gives us something to start poking and prodding and action questions about. That next step, though, bringing in the third party. We're internal experts within the company, and this can't just be an HR-led approach. And right away, the questions start coming up about industry trends. What is the right group of companies to compete against? Are we doing things right? Where should we be looking? And that's where that third party can come in and provide really useful advice. I work with Alpine Rewards. There were a lot of former consultants that I worked with in my past lives as well, from different organizations. They can help you see around the doors and corners, so to speak, because when you're making this kind of a change, it is personal. It affects everyone in the company. It can increase turnover. It can have negative impacts. I've been a part of an organization where we stood up there and said, "Hey, we're at the median of our peer group," and our peer group were companies in the upper quintile of payers, but our employees heard we're average. So it's even in the messaging. A third party can help you, see around that and really frame it correctly when doing the communications. And that last point involving stakeholders, the executive team, your functional leaders. I also like to bring in talent acquisition, recruiting, and also on the other side, the legal side, stock admin, just making sure that everything we do is compliant and fits in with the other systems. And obviously there's going to be a financial component, budgeting, what can we actually afford?
Yeah, great segue actually from both of you and into kind of the next topic that we wanted to get into, and maybe this one's a little bit more for Nishita, who's currently sitting on kind of the in-house side. But you already kind of mentioned that bringing the stakeholders along and getting them involved on the early end when you're looking to make a change in your comp program is important. And I think that probably resonates with a lot of people. You're talking about potentially increased budget. You're talking about very personal changes for their employees that they're going to have to kind of deal with. In addition to potentially engaging with a third party, I wonder if you could share any other strategies, thoughts that you have for getting buy-in or getting alignment with stakeholders and senior management who are going to have to be on board for those compensation changes.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like this question. I think it's so relevant and often hard to really get information on this because it's not something you can quickly Google and just know how you can deal with it. So it will depend on, again, the personalities and the kind of organization you're working at. But I do think in addition to sort of what I just covered on, conducting those stakeholder interviews at the outset of the redesign project, and that's critical because it sort of tells your management that their opinions and views are being captured from the outset, and you're sort of leading from a place of being inclusive and transparent. In addition to that, so one of the most critical steps, in my opinion, to securing management buy-in is to ensure that you clearly align and articulate how the compensation strategy or program goals ties directly to the strategic objective of the company. If you're successfully able to demonstrate and articulate that, even if it is the strategic objective tied back to this very tactical comp strategy that you're looking to roll out or implement, I think just that alone sort of it just ensures that at a very baseline, underlying way, the buy-in is already there because you're taking steps to actively move towards a better outcome that is in the better interest of the entire organization or specifically solves a business problem. So that's really, like, in my mind, the kind of step zero, if you will, that you want to be able to do. One guiding principle or strategy that I've personally always used to effectively roll out a program is to really not allow perfection to be the enemy of good and embrace the process for what it is, which is, especially in the world of sort of rewards and comp, a lot of what we do, a lot of the changes we make, they're very rarely quick 2-week turnarounds. Like, these are massive changes you're implementing to programs that have very widespread implications. And so I think being able to embrace that process for what it is and securing those wins through incremental enhancements is really important. As for the communication of the strategies, I think the most effective way to tackle this is really to start at the top of the house and ensure that senior management has a clear understanding of the strategy and the program. And not only can they articulate it, but they're really able to hone in and communicate the problem that it solves to their management team and their direct reports, and how it sort of promotes those broader strategic goals and why implementing this program or strategy, whatever it is you're trying to do, why that's in the better interest of the general population as well. And sort of once you're able to have that backing from top line managers, I feel like the communication, training, enablement, all the things that the comp team will be taking on down to the line manager level and then eventually to the employee base is significantly more successful if you've already got that buy-in from the top, as opposed to sort of working in a silo and being a little too precious about the plan. So I think you have to find that balance of being transparent and forthcoming from the outset without, obviously, compensation is sensitive data. You can't give all of it away, but I think just having that trusting and collaborative environment set from the start really helps.
Yeah, such an important point. I mean, I know we hear a lot about enablement and communication from the management teams being so important. And so obviously getting them on board earlier is going to be important for them to be able to do that effectively. One of the other things that obviously, I mean, coming from kind of the technology space, one of the things we hear about a lot or talk to folks who are thinking through is really just the tools, the technology that they should be using in general as part of their compensation program. And maybe to tie that back to this conversation, I'd be curious how you think about tools, technology in order to stay adaptive, whether it be to stay on top of some of the trends and data that you mentioned earlier, and then, or also to be able to adapt your compensation program once you decide to make a change. Are there any categories of tools that you find most useful? Any things in particular that you'd recommend? Would love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about this so much, especially being in the tech space. Our tech toolkit for comp and HR is just, it's so critical. And obviously, like kind of your foundations, you want a good HRIS in place, one that can support scale and growth that works for the organization. Performance management tools, of course, from talent acquisition side of the house, but really like focusing really on compensation, I'd say the two most critical tools that I highly recommend. And if you don't already have one, you really should evaluate. It's a comp management tool or a comp planning tool. So we at Braze, we use Equium, and it has just completely changed the way we do comp. We've moved out of spreadsheets. We've been able to build this out in this incredible product that is so highly customizable, where Peter, we've talked about this. Our teams pretty much have a weekly touch base where we're able to come in and say, okay, well, every comp program is nuanced. Braze has a very nuanced program, and we need to have a tool that can sort of adapt and be customized, that we can customize for our specific needs. And that's what Equium's been able to do. So I think that a comp planning tool to get out of spreadsheets is one that is a no-brainer to me. Another one that I do think is really helpful, and this may depend on how big the organization is, how many surveys you participate in, but eventually sort of a survey aggregation tool is also something you want to do. It just frees up capacity on your team to not do the tactical job matches over and over again, and to just have it in one place. So if you get a request from talent acquisition or a hiring manager or a leader to benchmark, there's a common language that the entire comp team speaks. You go into the tool, you have the specific job code that you pull, you're able to do that. There is no, oftentimes I think, especially with market data being what it is and art and a science, there's different ways you can pull it. There's different ways you can interpret it. There's different ways to massage the data. And I think that an aggregation tool really just brings a lot of consistency and fairness to the process.
Yeah, it really helped. I mean, obviously, we hear a lot about flexibility being important, and then this idea of kind of having a common language across, different benchmark sets that you might use, and even emerging ones makes a lot of sense. AJ, I know we've talked a decent amount about technology as well. Would love to hear any thoughts that you have on kind of what can go wrong with technology, and what people should look out for when picking their compensation technology strategy.
So that's my background. I was always hired to be the VBA spreadsheet person, to build complicated compensation spreadsheet tools, to do a lot of these things. And so, I have a perspective here. It was lifetime employment for me. It was probably not the best decision for any one of my employers. And that's just because, to these points here, spreadsheets are siloed. They're individual. Even with Google Sheets and like with Office 365 and having a lot more collaborative capabilities, there's still largely a single analyst who's working on it, who understands the internal workings. If they're really, really good, then they design it in a way that other people and other analysts can interpret it and dive in and use it. And they're experts. They even make notes and log it and record so people can read it and pick it up. But you're getting to the problem here. There aren't that many people who have that kind of training. They're not, we were hiring people to do software engineering who are not software engineers. So there's a whole discipline there that's really built around, how do we coordinate and work together as engineers to write programs? We're comp people first. So that's not really our primary background. And so that's really been the problem I've seen a lot of organizations fall into. It's the trap of not fully exploring and understanding the costs of build versus buy. Because when we buy something off the shelf, we have some major advantages. We've got a team of specialists who understand it and maintain it and make sure that it works correctly and is bug-free or as bug-free as possible. When a problem is discovered or a better way of doing things, it's automatically pushed out to everyone else. That's like the thing we love about software as a service. And you lose all of that when you build it as a spreadsheet. The other problem of, you have you have to hire an extremely qualified specialist as well. So in my own experience, I'll just give an example here. I learned compensation to be a VBA, like compensation planning expert at Facebook way back in the day. The interview was essentially, do you know VBA? We'll teach you comp. That was how desperate they were to have somebody who knew that specific sort of capability. And so that already tells you, like, even it's a dying language today. It was very much, uncommon then. And they were willing to do this because they had already done it. They had a data scientist build a system So I came in, I learned what that person had done, and it was essentially you have to build it each time and turn it around. And it was a refresh. To refresh it, you had to essentially rebuild the whole thing. Only way to make sure that it was working, and it wasn't scalable. I mean, it was already cracking at like 1,000 employees, and we were doing a lot of crazy things. And we were planning on being at 5,000. I mean, they're well many magnitudes larger today. The system wasn't going to scale, and it was already showing its cracks. So they made the decision because we had already built some custom tools. I mean, it's a preeminent engineering company in the world. We had our own custom talent acquisition tool built within another expensive software as a service subscription that we had. So we tried to leverage that and build on top of that a compensation administration tool. That problem was something it was a great problem to have. Like we got to build a really cool, turn all of our spreadsheets into this application, work with a project manager, some engineers. And when we were out soliciting bids, some of the organizations actually backed out. They looked at what we were requesting and they said, my top talent is going to be stuck working here. You're going to poach them to maintain this indefinitely because this is an ongoing thing that's going to continue to need to be iterated on and built up. That's what you're buying when you buy software, is the team doing all of that. So that's what they had to do. And I got invited back for the pre-IPO party. The engineers that we had hired were now their employees maintaining it. So if we had really started out, thinking like, okay, build is we pay some VBA person like, $75,000 to $100,000 a year, and they just make a spreadsheet and we do comp planning. And very quickly this balloons into, well, we have a lot of different things that our comp tools need to do. They need to interface with our HRIS systems. We need to aggregate different surveys and make sure that we have the system of record and truth here. We need to be able to work together. So we're getting really complicated really quickly. And it becomes something with a team of engineers that need to be hired. So $300,000-$400,000 a year each, plus a subscription service if you're building it on top of something else. And so very quickly we're looking at something that's like $500,000 plus a year just to maintain it, after several $1 million invested to actually build it. Millions of dollars. We don't have those kind of budgets in comp usually. And so my advice to organizations wanting to do a lot of these things is just to recognize that that's kind of what you're replicating when you choose to build it in-house. You're replicating the IT infrastructure, the engineering team, the QA team, the compensation experts who are bringing in the best practices and know what's going on. You can hire an expert that knows all of that, maybe, if you're really lucky. Or you can go out and source a tool that has done a lot of that work for you. And we already do that in everything else. Our HRIS solutions are not custom built. We go to Workday and PeopleSoft. Compensation has been a little bit lagging here. And it's great to see tools coming out like Equium, because I used to build spreadsheets like this. I mean, this is something I still do. I built for Alpine. I build them for independent clients. They're great. They're fun. They're useful. They're really complicated, and it takes a lot of time. Most of my time is actually spent teaching the team I'm delivering it to how to use it and maintain it, and then following up when they have questions. You don't have to do that if you just buy something that's already working and already does everything that you need it to do.
Yeah, that resonates a lot, obviously. And one of the other failure modes we've seen with that, aside from spending the kind of $500,000 a year, is just that, you don't budget for the maintenance piece. And then we talk to folks a couple years down the road, and either the consultants or the person in-house who built the custom spreadsheet or the custom configuration are gone. And now we don't know how to change it. So we're kind of stuck with that. We're going to move on to the last kind of scheduled question here. So just for any of the folks listening who might have questions for Nishita and AJ, start thinking about those. Feel free to drop them in the chat. The last question that I just had to get some thoughts from both of you on was, we talked a lot about the kind of framework and the data to follow in general to understand when you might need to make a change in your compensation strategy, and then how to actually do that. Would love to get both of your takes on, today, what is it that you're seeing? What are any emerging trends that you're aware of that you think will require companies to adjust their compensation approaches? And what are any things that the two of you are doing or recommending that your clients are doing in order to prepare for or address those changes?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty easy one, and one that will resonate with a lot of listeners in the AI boom and what's going to happen there. How do we comp those roles? Do we employ skills-based pay? Do we know how to do that? we establish a scalable program that we can do that and actually have something in place that we can say, is timely enough that we evaluate competencies or pay for specific skills that are not outdated by the time the program's really even been put into place. So I think AI is really one that we're watching very closely. Braze is very close to home. I think for us, really, it is how do we, one, as an organization, value that role, value that skill set? How does that look? Is that a part of our hiring plan? Are we going to be looking at actively hiring AI staff? The other piece here, again, kind of going back to what I mentioned previously, it's that third party engagement. That is a really, really, really good way to stay up to date with what is happening in the market. I think a lot of what we talked about here today, even if it is, tracking comp metrics or having a sense of what the next best step is, those things are often, if you think about comp metrics, it's not complicated. Everyone knows how to calculate it. It's fairly simple. I think where the real work comes in is, what is that threshold? What is that benchmark that we're looking at? And that's where the third parties come in and can provide that unbiased view of, this is how the industry looks at it. This is how our other clients have dealt with a similar problem. So I think, again, like for us at Braze, like having a close partnership with companies like Alpine Rewards is really, really critical here, because they're able to tell us that, this is actually some of the signals we've been seeing, they're now coming to fruition. We actually do need to start looking at this. And that, in conjunction with, again, your own internal comp philosophy, your HR strategy, your budgets, your affordability, all of that plays a key role. So I think right now we're in a place where we're kind of monitoring it. We're not right in the middle of it where we're trying to actively solve for it just yet at Braze, but we're very much aware that this is something we want to have, at least at the back of my mind. We're still building out our programs to last to scale. So as we kind of cross that hurdle, I think the next challenge that I can foresee us tackling will be really working with the engineering team to figure out, okay, what does this role mean for Braze, and how do we want to think about these professionals?
So I share a lot of that about AI, but what I've been hearing from a lot of my clients, and I'm seeing a lot of these products coming out, is a push for more real-time survey information. Compensation used to be submit once a year based off of your sort of fiscal year calendar, and so we'll update it quarterly, and there's an aging component to it when you want to choose to lead versus lag. A lot of the organizations I talk to want real-time information. They want to know what the market's doing right now. That was always a push when I was in-house as well. Like, how recent is this data? How reliable is it? So I suggest that that's going to continue, that there will be an even greater push for more real-time information. That's going to really stress any spreadsheet-related system, by the way. It's not going to be easy to update and maintain and keep it going with that kind of information feed. Systems then are easier to take advantage of that. At the same time, with more real-time information, there's also a lot more transparency. Pay transparency laws, have put more compensation information in the hands of everybody. So candidates negotiating for an offer today, employees coming to have a conversation about their comp, have more information than they've ever had at their fingertips. But I think that also leads to a lot of misunderstandings and misinterpretations. So following up, like having your comp strategy in place and showing that you've been consistent on how it works, is really helpful to counter a lot of that misunderstanding. And so that leads to my last thing here is an AI, right? If you've used ChatGPT, it's fantastic. It gives you great answers. If you're an expert in something, it gives you an answer that's like 80% of the way there. And so that's really the question. What do you do when it's off? What's the 20%? How do you even know? And so I would echo that. I think as these tools get more capable, it'll be even harder to discern fact from fiction, so to speak. And so relying on experts and on your metrics and actually knowing your data is going to be even more critical. And that's why, I'd echo getting the right compensation tools in place so that you know what they are and you can track your metrics and keep pace with the increasing pace and speed of our industry as it's evolving and becoming much more of an information highway. And then bringing in experts to help you understand what these AI systems are going to be pumping out and telling you, because when they get it wrong, it'll be convincing. And you need somebody like Alpine Rewards. Myself, I work with Alpine Rewards, somebody who's been there, who can help you figure out what's true and what's not, and help you design a strategy that actually works for you. Because again, these things are repeating what other tools and other words have been put into them. And so what we want is something that works for our organization. And so again, bringing in those experts to help you leverage the tools and the data that you have will be critical.
Yeah, great points. And both trends I know we've been hearing about a lot from the industry recently as well. And then both of the companies that are kind of hosting this webinar have offers that I wanted to remind you all about. For us on the Equium side, we've got an offer out for anyone who attended and kind of wants to see what their specific comp planning cycle would look like built out in our software. We'll grab some time to do that with you for free. And then the Alpine Rewards team is also offering 2 hours of free consulting for anyone who attended the webinar. And you've heard a lot of good reasons why getting some time with a third party today can really help you stay ahead of some of the things that are going on in the market. So definitely encourage folks on that one as well. And we'll give it just a minute or two to see if anyone has any questions for the speakers. And then we'll get to wrapping it up. And really appreciate the contributions, and having you both here this morning, Nishita and AJ. I know I really enjoyed the discussion. I think we got some great material for the folks listening in too.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Of course. Cool. Thanks for everyone for joining the webinar, and look forward to staying in touch.